A lot of people say they want to speak English more, but then the real moment comes. You meet someone, there is a silence, you know you should say something, and suddenly your brain gives you nothing.
That is such a real feeling. Not a big conversation, not a deep conversation, just small talk. The easiest kind of conversation in theory, and somehow one of the hardest in real life.
Exactly, because it sounds simple. How are you? Where are you from? Nice weather today. But when you actually have to do it, especially in English, it can feel awkward, forced, and strangely stressful.
And that is what we are talking about today. Why does small talk feel so hard? Why do people freeze in those little social moments? And how can you get better at it in real life?
I think the first reason is that small talk looks easy from the outside, but it is actually very quick. You have to listen, react, think of a question, stay friendly, and keep the conversation moving. That's a lot, especially in another language.
And there's another problem. Small talk is not only about words, it's also about timing. You have to know when to ask something, when to smile, when to add a comment, when to stop. That social timing is hard even in your own language sometimes.
Yes, and English learners often think the problem is vocabulary. Sometimes it is, but very often the real problem is pressure. The moment feels small, but the pressure feels big.
Because the person is thinking, I need to sound natural, I need to be friendly, I should not look awkward, I need to understand the answer. That's a lot of pressure for a conversation about coffee or the weekend.
And then the pressure makes the brain slower. That's what's so annoying. You probably know enough English to say something simple, but the pressure gets there first.
I think another reason small talk feels hard is that people secretly think it's fake. They think, why are we talking about the weather? We both know this is not an important conversation.
That's true. A lot of people don't really respect small talk. They think real conversation should be deep, meaningful, honest, interesting. So small talk feels weak or unnecessary.
But that's the wrong way to see it. Small talk is not fake conversation. It's social opening. It's how people test the atmosphere. It's how they show, I'm friendly, I'm safe, we can talk.
That's such an important point. Small talk is not really about information, it's about comfort. When someone says, busy day, or how has your week been, they're usually not trying to collect deep data. They're trying to create a relaxed connection.
Exactly. So if you hate small talk because it feels unimportant, it helps to remember that its job is different. Its job is not to be deep. Its job is to make talking easier.
And once you understand that, it becomes less strange. You stop asking, why are we talking about this? And you start seeing that the topic is often just a bridge.
I think another reason people struggle is that they expect too much from the moment. They think every little conversation needs to be smooth, interesting, and memorable. But most small talk is not memorable. It's just social movement.
Yes, it's okay if a short conversation is only okay. That's completely normal. Not every exchange needs to become magic.
That expectation causes a lot of stress. A person says hello to a coworker or a classmate and then later thinks, that was boring. But boring is not always bad. Sometimes boring just means normal.
That's especially important for English learners. A normal short conversation is already a win. You don't need to sound brilliant. You don't need to sound impressive. You need to keep the moment moving.
And that's where simple questions help. People often freeze because they try to think of something clever, but small talk usually gets better when the language gets simpler.
For example, instead of trying to say something very original, you can ask, how's your day going? Have you been busy? How was your weekend? Do you work near here? Is it always this busy here?
Those questions are simple, but they work because they're easy to answer. That's another secret of small talk. Good questions are light. They shouldn't feel like an interview.
Yes. You do not want the other person to feel like they are sitting in a job interview next to the coffee machine.
Exactly. Keep it light, easy, and open. That gives the conversation room to breathe.
I also think many people do not know how to continue after the first question. They can start, but then the conversation dies quickly.
That is very common. And the answer is usually not another completely new question. The answer is to stay with what the person just said for one more moment.
That is such a good point. If someone says, "My week has been really busy," you do not need to jump somewhere else. You can just say, "Busy in a good way or a bad way?" That sounds natural and keeps the conversation alive.
Or if someone says, I went to visit my sister, you can say, was that far from here? That is much easier than trying to invent a whole new topic.
So, one of the easiest ways to improve small talk is this. Listen for one useful detail and ask one small follow-up question.
That one habit can change everything because now the other person feels heard and you don't have to carry the whole conversation alone.
I think people also make small talk harder by being too afraid of silence. A tiny silence happens and they panic.
Yes, but short silence is normal. It does not always mean the conversation is failing. Sometimes it just means both people are thinking.
That is so important. Not every pause is a disaster. If you treat every pause like an emergency, you make the whole interaction more stressful.
And then you start saying random things just to escape the silence, which is how strange conversations are born.
Very true.
I think another reason small talk feels hard in English is that people want to sound natural immediately. That goal sounds reasonable, but it creates a lot of pressure.
Yes, natural comes later. First, you need simple, clear, usable English. Then, with time, it starts sounding more natural.
That is a much healthier way to learn. Do not ask, how can I sound like a perfect native speaker right now? Ask, how can I handle this small conversation clearly and calmly?
That goal is realistic, and realistic goals help people improve faster.
I also think it helps to have a few ready-made questions in your mind, not because you want to sound robotic, but because it reduces panic.
Exactly. If you already know 3 or 4 useful questions, then the next conversation feels less empty. You're not starting from zero every time.
Good ones are, how's your day going? How do you know everyone here? Have you been here before? What do you usually do on weekends? What kind of work do you do?
And then the next part is just as important. Respond simply. If the person says, "I work in marketing," you don't need a perfect response. You can just say, "Oh, interesting. Do you enjoy it?" That's enough.
Yes, small talk gets easier when you stop trying to be impressive and start trying to be present.
That may be the biggest lesson in the whole episode. Presence helps more than performance.
I think so too. When people are too focused on themselves, how they sound, how they look, whether they seem awkward, they stop noticing the other person, and small talk becomes much harder.
But when you shift a little of your attention outward, things get easier. You notice what the other person is saying. You react to it. You ask one small follow-up, and suddenly the conversation feels more natural.
Not perfect, but more natural.
And that's enough. For real-life English, more natural is already very good.
So maybe the real reason small talk feels hard is that it looks small, but it uses many skills at once: language, timing, listening, confidence, and social comfort.
But the good news is that it gets easier when you stop expecting too much of it. Small talk doesn't need to be deep. It doesn't need to be brilliant. It just needs to open the door.
And if you can ask a simple question, listen for one detail, and ask one follow-up, you're already doing something useful and real.
That's a strong place to start.
Thank you for listening.
See you next time.